Hello, everyone, and welcome to the August Agent Community Call. And as always, we're happy for anybody to jump in with any questions, or if anybody has any comments. If you don't feel like just jumping in, feel free to add them to the chat. And we'll just go ahead and jump in. On our agenda, we have the state of flow. Robert.
Thanks, Matt. I'm trying to think where we want to start. So we've been running Grafana Agent Flow in our dev clusters now for 13 days. Does that sound right? 4 minus 17 is negative 13. Yeah, okay, so 13 days. And things are looking pretty good. We ran into a few issues at first where like it was using too much memory. In fact, let me actually show everyone. That might be more interesting than me just kind of saying it's happening. So we have a few new dashboards for Flow, but I'm going to start with, maybe this won't actually work out. Operational. Okay, so if I switch over to the agents that are running Flow, pretty much, we've been running it so long now, I don't think we have data anymore for like a comparison view. But really, this is pretty comparative to the normal agents. Bytes per series is around 6-ish, which is pretty normal. We have 4 agents. Well, we have 8 agents, but with like 2 replicas each. And then across those, it's like 5 million active series. So I think we've been really trying to hammer Flow and get as much value as we can out of it. And it looks like it really doesn't have that much operational overhead compared to the normal agent, which is good and pretty promising for its results. We also have this new I just switched to light mode. That's fun. Hold on, let's change that. We also have this new dashboard for the Flow controller. So you can see that we're running 8 agents. Across those 8 agents, there's 368 components. Every component is healthy, and those components are being updated roughly once, or how would you say this? 1.5-ish times a second. Most evaluations of the components being updated and reevaluating the graph takes about 120 milliseconds, pretty quick. But sometimes the really big components take a little bit longer to update. We've been trying to get this number down as much as we can, and I think it's at a pretty good state. I think so. For those who aren't aware, the way Flow works is you have different components which interact with each other using like a declarative config. And if one of the component updates and another component is referencing that component's config, the component that's referencing it will update itself. So that's what we're saying about the graph reevaluation, where all the components that are referencing other components get updated. So sometimes it's slow, and I think if you come across this, the indication would be to try to reorchestrate how your components are structured, maybe like reuse information as much as possible. What we're running right now is a 1-to-1 translation from the existing config to Flow, which means we have like 8 service discoveries, which are all doing the same thing because that's how Prometheus would work. We have like relabeling the same targets over and over again because that's how Prometheus would work. And I think that adds up to sometimes relabeling pods takes quite a long time. So all that can be improved. But we wanted to test a 1-to-1 match before we tried optimizing something that you couldn't do with Prometheus. Matt?
Yeah, and I believe if we actually wrote it Flow first instead of conversion, like the config would be something like 1/3 or 2/3 smaller, considerably smaller.
Oh yeah, I mean so we already kind of knew this, that because Flow trades off the hierarchy of the current agent for a more flat config, that the new config will be a lot bigger. And it turns out to be like twice as much lines of code, although that's also a lot of like white spaces that you wouldn't really have in YAML. But that size can be cut down even further to be more YAML size equivalent if you started with a Flow config rather than trying to translate your existing YAML one. So should I move on to the fancy UI we're working on?
Absolutely.
All right, so this might not make it into main, just warning everyone. But the current like workflow today would be here's here's like I'm running an agent right now. Here's its config file where we have 3 components. One gets a file from disk. The other one's going to scrape Brian Brazil's robust perception demo and forward it to this third component, which is the write-ahead log plus remote write. If you wanted to see the current state of this agent, you would go to the debug config endpoint. We would get this like long list of each component with their health, when they were last updated, what their exports are for other components to reference. So you can see here we're wiring this dynamic label to the file's content. So the file content was change me, and that got added. They got merged into the dynamic label of the target. But anyways, this is pretty big. And what we found out for our kind of dev cluster workload, this file was 500 megabytes. And it was so big that you couldn't even load it into a browser. The reason why it's so big is because of all those those repeated service discoveries. So we have 8 service discoveries, all of them finding 22,000 pods. So that's 22,000 pods being listed in like a fancy, indented format 8 times. It's a huge file. So we're trying to find ways to work around that, which the UI, which I'm going to show you in a second, will help with. The other kind of debug endpoint is this graph, which uses GraphViz to render out the dependency graph. It's really basic. But kind of taking those lessons of this one giant file is way too big. Matt Durham and I have been working on a UI to kind of explore what a better world might look like. So I'm running the UI right now with mock data. This isn't real data. It'll be replaced with real data soon, but this is just like kind of fake data right now. So you can see the main page shows a list of components. I'm running 4, and I kind of faked like they're all in all 4 states. So local file is healthy. This one's unhealthy. This one's unknown. This one's exited. And aside from this view, we also have the DAG view, which is a similar view of the graph, but now it lays out with the health of those components, and you can kind of see, if something is feeding into an invalid state, or if something might not be healthy because it's depending on something that's unhealthy. So here the arrows mean reference direction. So metrics scrape Kubernetes pods is referencing metrics remote write default, and metrics remote write default is referencing the API key to write with. So if the API key was unhealthy, that would kind of mean that you might have problems soon with metrics remote write. Does that make sense to everyone? I should also state like the health of a component is independent from its dependencies. So if local file was unhealthy, that doesn't mean that anything referencing it is also unhealthy, because health is calculated like kind of just local to a component. So these are all links. So I could click on either a component from here or a component from here to go to the component page. I'll click on I forgot which one I mocked up, so I'm trying to make it look like it's a real demo. I think it's this one, metric scrape. So here's the component page. At the top, we have just the raw river block for what that component is, with fancy syntax highlighting. So its targets are coming from Kubernetes Service Discovery. It's forwarding metrics to remote write receiver. And you can see that its evaluated arguments is like this list of targets, which only has the one fake target in it. And it's forwarding to a river capsule value. We might make this a little bit nicer in the future, but right now it just kind of says, hey, this is a value we don't really know how to represent to you. And then inner blocks get shown as indented config. So the job name is being put in like a separate section here. Then at the bottom, we have the components that this component is referencing and the health of those components, which might be interesting for, figuring out if the whole chain is working. On the left, we have the nav bar. So each of these links, this page will probably get pretty big. So you could click on site, right now I'm not scrolling it, but if I resize my window, you could click to go to each section, jump from the nav on the left, which is helpful. Okay, so there are some extra pages we haven't. Oh, that's a bug with the z-index. But there are some pages we haven't mocked out yet. We're also expecting to have runtime and build information like Prometheus would show you. Right now, it's just an empty page. Also show the command line flags that are used to launch the agent. Also, right now, that's an empty page. Same thing with the config file. This would be the raw, unevaluated entire config file that the agent currently loaded successfully into memory. So I think all these things will be generally pretty useful for the agent in general, really. Like, this would have been nice to have today. But with Flow, it's a lot easier because we can have these generic pages for something like this. And if we wanted a more specific, customized page for what it means for a metric scrape to be shown to a user, then this could be like a different rendering that kind of, maybe expands out this targets argument into like its own table or whatever for debugging. But I think because of the component based concept, we were able to make this UI a little more easily than we would have been able to with the agent today, given that the agent today is just like a conglomeration of different things. Any questions or thoughts on the UI? Still in progress, by the way. Like the stylization's kind of hacky. We'll make it look cleaner later on. All right, Craig.
I think my question is more about Flow in general. Like I'm seeing a lot of things that are not compatible with the agent as it is now. Is Flow going to replace the agent as we know it in the near future? Or what are our plans for
near
that?
future now? Flow will, okay, so the plan is to try to launch Flow in an agent release next month before the next community call. We will listen to feedback and use that to decide how much effort we want to invest into Flow. If people like Flow, people like the idea, they like all like, the benefits it gives, and we invest more time into Flow, the end goal would be to deprecate the existing agent config format, provide tooling to migrate from the existing agent config format to the new one, and go all in on this being what the agent is now, like a Terraform, but for telemetry data. I think is kind of the catchphrase I'm going to spit out of nowhere. So I think it'll take time for that to happen. There's a lot of functionality that's not included right here. We only have some components for metrics. We need more for service discovery. We need components for logs. We need components for OpenTelemetry. We need a way to do clustering with Flow, to kind of replace the scraping service. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So this path of Flow becoming the default and only path, it depends on, one, people liking Flow, but then two, a lot of time. So I think it'll probably be about a year before the existing agent as it is today goes away, if Flow is received well and people don't have any negative feedback about it. Craig?
I guess a follow-up there, does that mean for that year, any features that get added to the agent need to be implemented on both sides?
Yes. I mean, not necessarily. Like, I mean, there will be functionality that you could say only makes sense in Flow. Like I prototyped a component to get keys from Vault and expose those secrets to other components that might need Vault secrets. That's something that we really couldn't do within the agent today, because it really depends on this idea that some part of the agent can reach out and ask another part of the agent for a value and have those things being wired together. But most things, like the fact that we're working on Flow does not mean that we stop working on the current agent. And the way that Flow is built, there's a lot of code being shared. So bug fixes for how metrics get scraped will impact both Flow and the agent by default. And we should keep doing it. Like, we should not be duplicating code right now. We should be trying to share as much as we can. All right, I'll stop sharing. Thank you, everyone.
All right, looks great. And now we will jump to the operator. Craig, you want to take us through that?
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna drop a link here. Wow, where is chat? There it is. Basically, a number of months ago, we made an RFC titled "Let's Deprecate the Agent Operator," and that caused a lot of conversation and, frankly, a lot of concern that we're not committed to the agent operator or that it's going to go away. Turns out people generally like it for what it is. So we just made a document here to kind of express our commitment to the operator and talk about our plans. The primary thing that people said they really like about the operator is that it lets us use the Prometheus CRDs, use pod monitors, service monitors, node monitors, that kind of thing. Is just a declarative way to monitor cluster resources. And people really like that. Our immediate plan is to bring that into the Grafana agent itself, so that the agent itself would be watching those custom resources and generating the scrape configs internally, doing the service discovery, and going. This works really well as a flow component. Maybe it would need to be backported into the I don't know what we're calling the existing agent. But the plan for the agent will be, if we implement the not service discovery, the custom resource discovery in the agent so that it's handling all that, then a large part of the operator that's reloading the agent every time you deploy a new pod is a lot simplified. And the operator then becomes primarily for deploying the agent itself, which is still an important job. And people are using it for that. I think particularly where there's a complicated sharded config, or you have a lot of integrations, or you have multiple agent deployments, the operator can be really useful to declaratively define what Grafana agents you want. There's daemon sets or stateful sets or deployments. That can get pretty complicated. So the agent is a good way to do that, but it's also a lot more static config. So at that point, we may be able to address alternatives. We may say, oh, this Helm chart does really well, but that's not to say we're ever going to say, oh, the operator is dead, unless it turns out the operator really isn't useful. But I think it will be, and we can continue to make it useful. So we've had a lot of issues with the operator. There's some documentation issues, there's some usability issues, and some maintenance issues. But I think the bottom line is we can address all those internally without making a lot of big external changes. And that's really the crux of it. I don't want people to be saying, oh, it's going to go away, so we shouldn't use it. If it's useful, it'll stay. We're not going to take anything away. Certainly not going to, like, we're committed to these use cases of declaratively defining your monitoring, especially the pod monitors and service monitors and things. Like, those are really valuable. We're going to keep supporting those. We're going to make the best way possible to deploy the agent, and we don't like breaking stuff. So hopefully we can assuage some of those fears and just make this project really good. That's all I have to say. Go ahead, Matt.
Since the question's been asked a few times, the Grafana operator is currently labeled as beta. Do we have any idea?
Yeah, I put a little note about that because that question has come up as well. It is labeled beta. I think it started as an experiment. We weren't sure if it was going to catch on, and it turns out it did catch on. People like it. So I think it's not beta as in we're not committed to it. It's beta as in it still needs work. And since I've outlined kind of some major refactorings, I hope they'll all be internal changes, but I don't want to commit us to kind of a style of we're not going to change anything at all ever. But certainly any changes would need to be well justified and have a transition. And once those are done, I assumed we'd revisit the beta designation. Go ahead, Robert.
So just to remind everyone, when we see something is experimental, that means we're exploring a new use case, and we're not sure how it's going to turn out. Like, we might just completely backpedal. So flow is going to be an experimental feature. It's a new use case, a new way to use the agent. And as an experimental feature, we will allow ourselves to just like say, nope out of it, remove all the code, not do that again. If something is beta, that means we're more confident about the use case being supported, but the way that use case gets exposed to users might change over time. So if you use the operator because you want the use case of Prometheus CRDs, that is something that we have committed to. But the operator as a delivery mechanism could potentially change whenever, right? Like that is what's in beta. The use case itself is kind of supported, but the way that use case gets exposed to you is like we're allowing it to change. And then stable means we're kind of more confident in both, and we might not do as many breaking changes. But also stable doesn't mean we'll never make a change if we don't have to, if we have to.
Exactly. TLDR, bringing the Prometheus operator CRDs into the agent, I think is pretty uncontroversial. People seem to really like that idea. It means the operator is not required to take advantage of those features, which I think is universally a good thing. And the operator doesn't really need to change externally to handle that. So that's, I think, a good change that we're looking at in the future, the near future. And then from there, that just lets us kind of reevaluate, what is the agent for? Is it necessary? Would it be easily replaced by a Helm chart or as a wrapper around a Helm chart, or who knows? But I think it becomes easier to maintain at that point, and we have a lot of options. Good question, Robert. The agent operator.
You said, what is the agent for? So I'm just correcting you.
Oh, what is the agent operator? Okay, yeah. What is the operator for? We have a lot of options, and we're going to reassess it. But kind of constantly, the goal is make it easier to monitor your stuff, particularly with those CRDs that people like, and make it easy to deploy the agent. We're not going to change anything that makes any of those wrong, and we're not going to rip anything out from people that are depending on it. So that's it.
All right. Any questions about the operator before we move on? All right. Does anyone have anything else they would like to bring up? I think that's the end of what we had on the agenda. It just signed me out of Google Sheets. Awesome. If anyone has any questions or comments or any other topic you'd like to bring up, feel free to do so. I'll give everybody 30 seconds or so to jump in with anything. All right. If no one has anything else, then we will cut it short and call it a day. And I appreciate everybody showing up. Thank you all.
Thanks for coming.
Yep.
Bye. Bye.